Hey folks, Caleb here with SecondSonWoodworks. I'm going to start off this project by saying that doing things the easy way may seem like a good idea to begin with, but from experience, it often ends with making more work and making the project actually more difficult than if you just did it good the first time around. So today, I'm going to be giving you an example of that type of project. This is going to be a DIY rolling lumber cart that I'll be making out of some scrap plywood that I had laying around in my shop. You can see here that I'm starting off with this funky looking piece of plywood. It's pretty thin plywood. I think it's 1/2 inch thick. There was a piece that was cut out of it for another project. I think it was someone's van who previously lived in my house. So I'm using that and a couple other pieces to create a really simple rolling lumber cart, and everything worked out pretty well, except for the main flaw in this cart was the use of some old wheels casters that someone gave me that they had harvested from a Harbor Freight creeper crawler thing that goes underneath of a vehicle. They took the wheels off and they gave them to me, and I thought to myself, oh, these would be great to use for something like this. Wrong. Not a good idea. Bad wheels. And I'll explain more later. I kind of let the wood determine the actual design of this project because my goal was to just use some of the wood up that I had already in my shop. And I wanted to do as minimal cuts as I could. Pretty much I was just trying to be as lazy as possible, which like I said earlier on in this video, doesn't always end up good. Being lazy and trying to do things the easy way often has its repercussions, which you'll see later on. Another issue with this cart is that I didn't build the actual frame up enough around the plywood, and so there was quite a bit of flex once I loaded up the cart with plywood and a bunch of weight, and the cart itself kind of wobbled and moved, and that is part of the reason why I end up having to take all the lumber out, which you'll see later on in the project, and reinforce the entire cart. But you can see here that I'm using the wheels that I was discussing earlier that were recycled from a crawler. The wheels themselves are not horrible. They could probably be used for something else in the future, but just not for this much weight. There is just too much weight that I added to this lumber cart. But in the end, the lumber cart does work out, and eventually I will have to get some new wheels, which you're not going to see me do in this project today. I keep the wheels on there that are from Harbor Freight, but I will eventually have to go and switch them out. So just good wheels to begin with, good casters, something that's rated for a higher weight. Other thing that really affected this lumber cart was the fact that I was storing it in the corner of this old garage that serves as my workshop, and this garage is falling apart, to say the least. You can see that there's a big crack, or several big cracks, underneath the lumber cart right now. And that's probably the worst area in the slab of the garage. It has completely cracked apart, and there is quite a bit of space for those wheels to drop into, which ends up being part of the problem later on. One of the wheels dropped into the crack and ended up snapping off once it had all the weight of plywood in the actual lumber cart. I'll be putting out a video, or actually a couple of videos, of doing some renovations to this shop for my landlord. I use a little DIY hack of using some spray foam insulation in the cracks themselves, as well as I will be putting out a video on reinforcing the ceiling joists in the garage itself. So stay tuned for those projects. Nevertheless, a lot of you are in a similar situation where you may be renting a place, and or if you own it, you might just have a small workspace, or you might have to use the shop, the garage space for other things such as parking your car or your kids' bikes or whatever it is, and it is somewhat difficult to use the space for woodworking. That is why having rolling carts and work surfaces is really handy, so that you can store them away when you're not using them and then roll them back out when you do need to use them. Alright, so at this point in the project I thought that the rolling lumber cart was complete, so I went ahead and loaded it up with a bunch of plywood that I had in my shop because I needed to move on to another project and I needed the plywood to be out of my way, so I put it all into the lumber cart and then went to push it back into the corner. It was a little bit difficult. I had to cut down some of the pieces because of the space, but I was able to push the rolling cart into the section where I will be storing it, and it seemed to be working out pretty well. But I ended up putting more lumber on the top, which was probably not the best idea. And when I came back to the cart to move it, when I needed to access that space, that's where I ran into some issues. And you'll see here in a second, when I came back another day, I was working on the ceiling joists in the garage, and I went to move the rolling lumber cart, and it didn't go well. So like most time that I am able to get into the shop to do some sort of project, I am usually in a really good mood when it starts, when I first am able to get out there. Which right now you can see Caleb in a good mood, feeling in control, feeling like I have this project under wraps. It's in order. I'm going to move this lumber cart with no issues. But watch and learn, you will see here soon that the wheel, or one of the wheels, maybe two of the wheels within the middle of the cart, they get stuck in that crack and they end up breaking. And sadly, the cart itself, because I had all of the wood on top of the cart, started to fall over. It actually started to wobble back toward me, and you'll see that here in a second, and it was definitely a big bummer. I had to put some wood underneath one of the corners when this happened to hold up until I could take all of the plywood out of the cart, and it was depressing. So after reluctantly unloading the entire lumber cart that I thought I had loaded so nicely and organized, I flipped over the cart and pulled off the wheel. You can see here, this is the wheel that bent. And you can see that these wheels only have two slots for attaching to the underside of a cart like this, and so they're just not really great wheels. Like I said earlier on in the project, you could use this on something a bit lighter, but I didn't have anything on hand, so I went ahead and reused them, which is probably once again another bad idea, because like I said earlier on, additionally, I will have to come back to this project again, not this time, but another time. I haven't done it yet, and I'll have to add some new wheels, but right now you can see that I am adding a bunch of just additional 2x4s to the underside of the cart itself. Probably isn't the most professional way to do something in terms of reinforcing. Maybe I should just rebuild the entire cart, but this is what I opted to do, and it actually ends up making the cart a whole lot more sturdy. I do some 2x4s on the side of the cart as well, and I guess screw everything together and then flip it over before adding the ones on the side. Now, I thought about just posting this video, the lumber cart, and not explaining any of these extra steps that were kind of stressful, where I didn't do the best planning and made some mistakes. But because I think that we all go through similar things in the shop, I decided, what the heck, just go ahead and post it, and hopefully I can get some comments from each of you out there about similar situations, similar frustrations that you've experienced in the shop. We're all learning, and we're all only human. So if you have some crazy experiences, throw them up in the comment section below. But because I needed to move on to working on those ceiling joists, I went ahead and loaded the cart back up and hoped that I would be able to push it into the corner without any wounds being issued to those wheels on the underside. But you'll see here in a second that the side wheel right there in the middle ends up bending again. And so I just ended up pushing it into the corner using a 2x4 and getting it in there as best as I could. It still technically rolls. I think I'll be able to get it out later. And I'm going to have to come back to it. But, you know, that's what happens. Sometimes it doesn't work out. See you next time.